Welcome into the Grace Point Daily Podcast. My name is Jeremiah Johnson. We exist to bring you daily encouragement for your daily walk with Christ. This is going to be a verse-by-verse edition with none other than Dr. R.B. Maynard. Welcome, Rick Maynard.
It's good to be back again.
A man who goes by many names, but one specifically, Dr. R.B. Maynard. Are people catching on to that? Is that becoming a movement now?
I heard this morning on Wake Up Grace Point, you just called me Rick.
Oh, my goodness, I slipped.
The lack of respect there is
That'd be like calling the Pope Bill or something.
Yeah, no, really. I didn't even know that was the Pope's first name.
Yeah. So anyway, this is a verse-by-verse edition of the Grace Point Daily Podcast. Thank you for those of you that listen to the podcast. Again, you can listen to it on all major podcast platforms. And then as well, now we are on Facebook Live as well. So you can catch us live on Facebook or go back, hit the replay, or listen to the audio version, share it. We just are giving you more and more ways to connect with the Grace Point Daily Podcast. So I got one the other day, Rick, just a little promo here. I do have one that I'm going to be covering on racism sometime this week.
Yes.
I shared the story of, I talked about racism on Sunday.
Right.
Young black kid I had a chance to mentor, Rashad Jackson. He's now 26 years old. I talked to him yesterday on the phone and kind of did a pre-conversation with him. And anyway, I think, what's interesting is say about guys is that, it's probably been, 15 years since I talked to him or something. And it was just like I talked to him yesterday, and except he was a man now and man voice and all that stuff. But I felt kind of bad too, because I really haven't communicated with him for 15 years. But I just like, man, you've never left my heart. I love you. I love you today, like I loved you yesterday, and all those kind of things.
Right.
Great times.
Yep.
But we'll check that one out. We're going to talk about racism from a white guy's perspective, a young black man's perspective, New Yorker. He's a New Yorker. I can't remember if he grew up in New York, but I connected with him in Minneapolis, where there's a lot of hot stuff going on right now. So anyway, but check that out. I'm really excited for that, and definitely think it's something we need to talk about and dive into. So many things to dive into in our culture today, but definitely one of those issues. All right, let's get in the word, Rick Maynard, Dr. R.B. Maynard.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, we just with all the scriptural stuff too, you think racism is something new, but you go all the way back, and Jews and Gentiles and Philistines, and you had all these different people groups. They might not have been what we look at as difference in color as much, but it's been going on. It's nothing new. We act like all this is new, but it's really nothing new. But anyway, we are in 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 28. And this is where talking about the king looking for advice about what he should do about some things. And he's gone to advice from friends and different people. So it says in verse 28, after seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." So he has, he's looked for advice, and he got advice from the elders, and it kind of says what they said, and then he got advice from his friends, which was poor advice, and he took a little bit of both, put it together, and made up his own agenda, is what's happened here. And it's just, he looked from his friends, from spiritual advisors, and it really came back to what's going to be the best thing for me is what, in other words, what's going to make me look the best. It's political. We talk about that over and over, how political all these things are. But that's what it is. They can say all day, this is in the best interest of the people. Is it really, or is it the thing that's going to make you look the best among the majority of the people? It's the thing that's going to get me votes, if you would. Yeah. And so that's what he's doing here. And there had been calf worship and ox worship in Egypt. So when he's talking about the ones that brought you out of Egypt, we know that's not what brought them out of Egypt, but they did make a golden calf, and they started going back to their old ways. It's like, well, I don't know that God is doing what he should be doing, or I don't agree with the way God's doing it, so I think I'll just go back to the way it was. And and again, you can relate that to church life. Well, we've tried all these things, and the church didn't grow, or we might as well just go back and do things like we used to do because, this doesn't appear to be working. And so they were going back to the old gods. I mean, that's not what brought them out, but that's what he's saying. This is what brought you out of Egypt. So let's go back. And then it's about it's too difficult, so I'm going to make things easier for you. I mean, he says, it's too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods. So we'll just set them up here, and it'll make it convenient. You won't have to, go to Israel. You won't have to go to all the feast and all that stuff. So he's really changing everything that God set in motion about what the requirements were. He's backing off. No, you don't have to do that. I'm going to set it up where it'll just be easier for you. And that's, again, isn't that political in every sense? Let me make what's the easiest thing. Socialism, the easiest thing. The government pays everything. Everything's free. Well, people latch onto that, So, and there are people who said it wasn't that it wasn't his intention to worship these gods or whatever, that it was more about setting them up for the people. But it's still, whether you're an accessory to it or whether you're the one worshiping, it's the same difference. So verse 29, it says, one he set up in Bethel and the other in Dan. That just has to do with the north and the south. Bethel is where Jacob had his dream. It's a sacred place, if you would, but they're making worship convenient. We'll set up one in the north and one in the south, and then you all don't have to gather in Jerusalem into Israel to worship. So you won't, in other words, you don't have to sacrifice as much to serve God. That's what, and we don't even really have to say it how it all applies to today.
Yeah, absolutely.
But let's just make it easy. And verse 30, and this thing became a sin. The people went even as far as Dan to worship the one there. So not only did he make it convenient, but people got so accustomed to it, it's like, well, man, if this one's good, let's go to the one in the north and worship. And the people in the north, let's go down in the south and worship that one and see, maybe if we worship both of them, we'll be even better people and God will bless us even better. But, and things that start out, I'm sure that Jeroboam in his heart probably thought that these things were good things. This is all going to work out good for you. I doubt that he really said, well, I really just want to take care of me and nobody else. I think he probably wanted good things for people. And so what started out to be a good thing then turns into complete idol worship. It just went too far beyond what he was trying to do. And I just had to think about, I wrote the statement, no alcoholic believed he would be that with the first drink. And no drug addict, no porn addict, no money lover, no whatever it is, nobody thinks, well, I'm just going to try it. And, I hate to say it, I got away with a lot as a teenager that I could have, by the grace of God, that he saved me from those things. But I very well, I tried a little bit of drugs and I drank a little bit. And, some of those kind of things that could have latched on to me and I could have become that alcoholic, that drug addict or whatever. And God preserved me from that. But I had that attitude, well, I just want to try it. I just want to see what the drugs feel like. I just want to see what the alcohol feels like. Those kind of things. And so even if you set out with good motivation, you've talked recently about the prodigal son. When he set out, he asked for his money up front. Well, when he set out, I don't know that he expected to come back broke. I think it's, well, I'm going to spend a little money here and a little money there. And before long, he was out of money.
Yeah.
So the motivation, sometimes you can have good motivation to start with, and then it just falls apart. So that's what's happened. Verse 31, Jeroboam built shrines on high places and appointed priests from all sorts of people, even though they were not Levites. So he's got idols, now he's got altars, and the culture of the day was, or what was happening there was, he was changing the Constitution. I mean, if we want to relate it to today, that's what we do. It's like, well, this has always been, our founding fathers said this, but people who are twisting that, they don't care what the founding fathers said. I mean, that's about, well, yeah, but that was then, and those were different circumstances, and so we need new rules. The big one is right to bear arms. Well, that's constitutional. Well, yeah, but they didn't know what our culture was going to be like,
Right.
and so we need to change that. We need to outlaw guns, and I'm not being pro or con, gun control. So that's not anything about it. But the priesthood, he had changed. It was supposed to be Levitical. You were supposed to be a Levite to be a priest. I mean, that was God's way. That wasn't man's way that came up with that. It was God's way. And what does it say there? He says, he appointed priests from all sorts of people, even though they were not Levites. So it's like, well, I'm going to give you a license with the Assembly of God because I just kind of like you and I like the way you do things, or you're willing to do this. So here's your license from the Assemblies of God, in other words, or Baptist or whoever it may be. I mean, that's what he was doing. And the there's an idea with people, and please don't get me wrong, this sounds like I'm talking about this because of the things we're going through with racism right now. But this idea that, there's equalitarian, which is relating or believing to the principle that all people are equal and deserve equal rights and opportunities. Well, we would say, well, yes. I mean, we believe in that. Well,
Sure.
it is true, but not all have equal rights to do things. You earn some rights to do things. So just because you are born in the United States or whatever, we say, well, we have these certain rights. But if you want to bring it down to the church, you can't vote on the pastor here if you're not a member of the church. So we say, well, we have a right to elect pastors. Well, not if you don't belong to this church. You don't have a right to come in and vote for the pastor of this church. So, people just seem like they believe that these rights that they talk about in these things, it's just, I've got these rights and I can do anything I want to do because I'm just as good as you are. And it's and that's not. I mean, that's what he's doing here. That's what Jeroboam is doing, is kind of making everybody equal and saying, well, you got a right to be a priest now. Well, no, you don't, because you're not a Levite. I mean, under God's command, not man's command. So, apparently there were Levites that possessed special talents of leadership, but these were Levites who didn't qualify. I mean, in other words, well, let me back up. The Levites qualified because they were Levites. They didn't have to have any other reason. And sure, they might have picked the best Levites to be priests, but still, that was the one requirement, and he was throwing that out. Verse 32, he instituted a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the festival held in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar. This he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves he had made, and at Bethel he also installed priests at the high places he had made. So again, this is all about just doing what he wants to do. And it's amazing how people who, and I can't even think of a good illustration today, but how people, they want to imitate God. They don't want to do things like the Bible, but then they'll pull out a verse out of the Bible. Well, yeah, but the Bible says such and so. I've used that illustration where, some guy told me one time, a renter who owed me money, and, it's just this whole big deal. And he pulled the God card on me, Well, Christians are supposed to help those in need. And, he wanted to play that Christian card, that God card. And I said, well, and the Bible also says if a man won't work, let him not eat. I mean, they want to use the imitation or a little bit of God to try to prove a point, but yet They don't want the whole of
Yeah.
it. And that's what he's doing here. This feast is on the 7th month of the 15th, or the, yes, 7th month on the 15th day. And the Feast of Tabernacles was on the 8th month on the 15th day. So it's like he's taken a little bit of, what was a feast, but now I'm going to create this new feast, but it's still going to be on the 15th day of the month. I'm just going to change the month so that it's, not the same time. So verse 33 it goes on, says, on the 15th day of the 8th month, a month of his own choosing. So here it is. He offered sacrifices on the altar he had built at Bethel. So he instituted the festival for the Israelites and went up to the altar to make offerings. So, he's just in the wrong, and the priests that aren't Levites, priest of his own choosing, offering sacrifices to idols. Mm-hmm. I mean, literally offering a sacrifice to a statue or of a calf and an ox. And I never have really, I don't have that concept of worshiping idols. Mm-hmm. I mean, and maybe idol worshipers would say the same thing about me worshiping a God I can't see. I mean, I know we can say, well, we see God in nature, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Physically, I can't look and say, there's God. I know what he looks like. I know how tall he is. I mean, so probably people who worship a statue think I'm crazy and you're crazy because we're dumber than they are. We worship something that we can't even see. But I, from my perspective, looking at them, I don't understand how somebody can worship something that sits on the shelf. That seems more bizarre to me. Yeah. And then to bring things and lay them down before that idol, like, the calf, the ox, offering actual burnt sacrifices. I mean, it's just beyond my my thinking about how that even happens. But it talks about going up to the altar to make offerings, and there's a contrast here between what Solomon had done, what David had done, and what Jeroboam now is doing. And we'll just go through some of the differences. But Solomon, what Solomon was doing was divinely inspired. Everything Solomon did, everything David did, it talks about how they cried out before the Lord, how they went before the Lord and said, shall I do this? What do you want me to do in this situation? So there we're divinely inspired, where Jeroboam just is inventing things that, I'm going to make priest out of these, whoever he wanted to, probably his buddies. Or there's no word that Jeroboam said, I'm going to pray about this, and I'm going to seek God on this and see what I should do. He just decided to do what he wanted to do. Wow. There's scriptures that talk about they did what was right in their own eyes. That was the downfall, and that's our downfall. But Solomon had principles of the Torah. Jeroboam twisted God's word, in other words, and used it to. Because what did he say? The gods that brought you out of Egypt. Well, he's going all the way back to the time of Moses, where they were worshiping the golden calf. Well, they got in big trouble for that. I mean, that was not, how do you, well, we're going to worship like they did. Well, that scared me to death. It's like, well, wait a minute. I kind of remember what happened to them. I'm not sure I want to do that. Right. But he must have great trust of the people. But Solomon had statues of the cherubim, in other words, the heavenly angels, if you would, representing the Spirit of God and those kind of things. Jeroboam comes up with a calf and an ox. Solomon, the cherubs look like children. With Jeroboam, they were young calves. In other words, it's almost like an imitation. The cherubs' wings pointed upward. It talks about the cherubs, I think is the right pronounce, but on the Ark of the Covenant, that their wings were spread upward, with the horns of the calf pointing upward. I mean, everything that he was doing, the date of the feast biblically was on 7/15. The date for him was 8/15. So even using that as part of it, the Sabbath celebration, Jeroboam changed the day of the Sabbath. Solomon had kept the feast, and Jeroboam changed the feast, so the people wouldn't remember the other feasts. It's like we have a new. It wasn't even like, okay, we're going to do this, but we're going to add to it. He was more like, well, we don't need to do that. We're going to do this now. We have a new feast, and so it's, you know, and again for us in the church, it's as if, you know, and I understand we change. You know, we
Yes.
don't do worship like we used to do worship,
Right.
but it's not a matter of change because we're trying to be worldly or whatever. But things just change.
God does new things. He does new things.
There's new music now. That
Sing
we
a new
didn't
song
have.
to the Lord, right?
There you go. There you go. But all these changes for the sake of change, all these changes for the sake of building himself up, making him look more like a god. In other words, it would be the same. Really, what it is, it's the same thing. It's not about like coming to the church. If you come here and did a different kind of worship, or we have a platform that looks different than it used to, there are changes like that. But you didn't come in here and say, well, I know that the Assembly of God teaches water baptism, but we're not going to do water baptism anymore.
Yeah.
You know, that was then. This is now. We have. You know, it's kind of hurting people's pride to make them get up there in a tank and get all wet, and mess up their hair, and you know. So we're just not going to do that anymore. That's a big difference,
Right.
than saying we're going to sing a different song, or we're going to have a different look on a platform. Or
Sure.
those are totally separate things.
Yep.
But there are people who make the change in the song. They almost make them like you have changed
Yeah, God,
the bylaws
theology.
of the assemblies of
Sure.
God. You know, so
I had one time, one thing in the church that's not as popular anymore is Sunday school. There's a lot of churches
Right.
that don't do Sunday school anymore. We do at Grace Point, so we are still spiritual.
Right.
But anyway, back when I was in South Dakota, now in South Dakota, we had multiple services. So we did have it, but it was really annoying because we had like a service number 1, and then we tried to squeeze it in between
Right.
service number 2, and then it was just really annoying. It wasn't, in my mind, that effective. But I remember walking by a pack of, I was going to say old ladies, but I don't want to get,
Yeah.
I already said it. No. But anyway, walking by a pack of ladies, and, you know, the one lady was like, "And my grandson's church, they don't even do Sunday school." And it was like, all the ladies in that circle are like, like, and it was literally like they had committed
wow.
treason, like blasphemy against the Lord.
Right.
I'm like, well, maybe because of what's happening in the life of their church, it's not conducive to the ministry. It doesn't mean that they
Right.
lost their salvation.
it's what
But
works for a given time. Well, the old saying is, "Don't beat a dead horse," and then the addition to that was, "When the horse is dead, dismount." You know, and so, you know, and we've, you know, the church and Sunday school has been up and down. I mean, it's all followed suit, because I can remember there was a time where Sunday school was like, you know what, and we've talked about this before. At what point do you give up? At what point do you say this is not effective because only 3 people, you know, only 2 people come to Sunday school? So then you start thinking, is it worth preparing that if only 2 people are interested? Well, you know, you look at both sides of that. You look, well, but there's 2 people there that want to hear, you know.
Yep.
But you look at the other side of it and say, well, it must not be effective if only 2 people are, you know, so there's just that fine line. But Sunday school got down at one time where there was, you know, 4 or 5 people.
Yeah.
And
Okay, now this story is not meant to particular friend. I'm not as connected because of time and space, as connected anymore, but I was on a friend's board for a ministry / church, and we meet once a year. And so I was at one of his first board meeting I was at, and he was giving his report over the year, and he was like, we want, let's see here. And I'm not exaggerating. I know it was less than 10, but I think it was like, man, I'm just so excited. We had 8 people come to church this year. Mm-hmm. That was guests, visitors, salvations, 8 people.
Right.
The whole year.
Right.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, we could say, well, sometimes we got 100, 150, 175. But man, throughout the whole year, we probably had 400 or 500 people roll, if you counted,
right,
or whatever, maybe more. But his total count was like 8 people.
8.
And I was kind of struggling for a second. Like, I don't know if like, maybe you could just join another, partner with another
right,
church
right.
or, and it was hard. And I didn't know, and he was so passionate and so believing in what he was still doing that I was like, all right, well, what else how can I argue that? Like, your spirit seems right. Your heart seems right. You want to keep pushing forward. So, hey, I'm your friend, and I'll bless that if that's what you think is God's calling you to do.
Right.
I might not do that, but that's what you feel God calling you to do. So anyway, the fine lines of some of that stuff.
It goes to that point of because people could argue and say, well, why in the world would you have a church of 8 people? Why would you do that? That's the craziest thing I ever heard. Well, what if the next Billy Graham got saved in that church? And so you've got all those things to. But I love what you have said several times since you've been here, because the church does it's up, it's down, people leave, people come. I mean, it's back and forth. You could get so discouraged with that. But what you have said several times, God called me here. And until God releases me, however many, in other words, you say, I don't look and say, well, we only had 50 people on Wednesday, or we only had 50 people on Sunday, or whatever it may be. You don't look at that. You're looking at, God called me here. So if there's 50, then I'm going to minister to those 50 because I know God called me here.
Yep.
And so
I look at the money, and we are rich right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, that'll keep you here for sure, if nothing else. So,
right.
So anyway,
we're Prosperity Church.
Yeah.
I always tell people that.
Right. Well, we are getting close. Why don't we, let me just explain, and then we'll just wrap it up today.
Okay.
What happened with the coronavirus and everything, Sunday school, podcast, different things kind of got jumbled up a little. Then
you're in my world now. Multiple podcasts, live speaking, videos. Right. Like it's it's not an easy thing, Dr. Maynard.
Yeah. Before long, I'll be sitting here by myself. I won't even need you anymore.
Right.
So, no, I doubt that because I
pretty much run the board right now in verse by verse anyway. So
I got I got a new remote control the other day, and I can't even get it to work on my TV. So I doubt that I'm going to be here by myself. So. But what happened, we had gotten, I think, into like chapter 13 or something in podcast 13, 14, along in there. Well, then I suddenly realized for Sunday school and podcast that somewhere I had dropped out chapter 12.
That's offensive.
Yeah, so I'm rewording the Bible. I didn't like what it said in there, so I left it out. But anyway, we backtracked and did chapter 12.
That deserves one of those. That's from MCD, but
there you go.
How could you leave out chapter 12?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't apply to me, so I left it out. But so anyway, we left out chapter 12. We backtracked. We got chapter 12 finished up, and then we started the Wednesday night with doing verse by verse on Wednesday night, and I was in chapter 14 there. So when I went this morning, it's like, wait a minute, I think we've already done this, since we're in chapter 14 on Wednesday night, since I just finished chapter 12, we're going to jump ahead to 15.
Chapter 15.
So you may have to backtrack, read some of it to catch yourself up if you're lost like I am here. So we'll quit there today because we're ready for chapter 15 next time. So
awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Rick Maynard. And we want to encourage you guys. We are live now. We do verse by verse live, Facebook Live, Grace Point Assembly of God. That's how you'd search that out. GracePointAG.org. We have all of our media stuff there, whether it be our podcast, live videos, etc., etc. You can give, you can see what's happening live to church, or go to Grace Point Daily, the YouTube channel. So all kinds of good stuff going on here. But this is Grace Point Daily Podcast, verse by verse. Thank you so much, guys. We will talk to all of you next time.